Smoke was still rising on the horizon when Lot and his 2 daughters hid in a cave in the mountains. Behind them, the world they knew no longer existed. Sodom and Gomorrah had turned to ash. Everything smelled like the end of the city, the end of the people, the end of history. And it was there, in the middle of nowhere, that one of the Bible's most curious stories began, not with celebration or joy. It began with fear, loneliness, and a plan that no one would have expected. Lot's daughters were convinced that the world had ended, that there were no more men on earth, that there was no hope of continuing the family. Despair, when it meets silence, can make a noise inside. And then the idea came to her. Get her father drunk, lie with him and beget offspring. It's strange, it's uncomfortable, but that's what happened. In that cave with no witnesses, Moab was born, the son of a hasty decision, made in silence and pain. Moab came into the world without guilt, but carrying a weight he didn't even know about. His name, his origin, everything was marked. He wasn't just a baby, he was the symbol of a desperate choice, of a lineage that began on the edge of shame. But there he was, growing up, living, learning to walk with a past that no one dared tell aloud. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like the content, feel free to support our work with a financial aid by clicking on the Thanks a Lot button. You can also become a member of the channel and enjoy exclusive benefits. Moab grew up far from the eyes of the world, on the dry and lonely eastern slopes of the Dead Sea. The soil there was hard, cracked by the sun, but even so, it took root. There were no wide rivers, no green forests, but there was space and freedom, and it was in this difficult terrain that he began to form what would come to be called the Moabite people. Over time, their children multiplied, their tents became villages, and the villages became cities, a people who came from nothing, building everything with their own hands. Moab didn't just become a name on an ancient scroll. It became a land, a culture, a language, an altar. They built stone houses and altars to foreign gods, with strange names and even stranger rituals. Life there followed its rhythm, with cattle grazing in the valleys, children running among the stones, and sacrifices made on high hills, as if they wanted to reach the sky with fire and smoke. But even with all this, the Moabites knew they were not alone in the region. On the other side of the desert, the children of Israel were also growing up, a different people with a different God, a God who didn't accept mixture nor alliances without purpose. And although Moab was a distant relative of Israel, after all, Lot was Abraham's nephew, the relationship between the two peoples was never simple. In fact, it was like an ember burning under the sand. It seemed calm, but any wind could turn it into a fire. And that wind began to blow strongly when the Israelites, after years of wandering in the desert, came close to the land of Moab. Hungry, tired, seeking passage, hoping for hospitality. But what they found was something else quite different. When the Israelites approached the land of Moab, they didn't come as conquerors, nor with swords in hand. They just wanted to get by. They were a weary people who had crossed the desert for decades, fleeing Egypt, guided by an invisible God and ancient promises. They were hungry, thirsty, and had small children walking alongside old men bent by time. They expected at least a little compassion from the Moabites. After all, they were relatives, but that's not what they found. The Moabites closed their doors. No bread, no water, no passage. As if they were looking at ghosts, they treated them as a threat. The mistrust was so great that it turned into fear, and fear soon turned to hatred. Israel didn't react violently at the time, but God saw, and he didn't forget. The Moabites' refusal wasn't just a practical denial. It was like spitting on the ground in front of someone who was starving, like turning your back on a fallen brother. From then on, an invisible line was drawn between the two peoples. The memory of this rejection was branded with hot iron among the Israelites. so much so that God's own law later declared, "No Moabite shall enter the congregation of the Lord, not even to the 10th generation." What was just a gesture of coldness became a lasting curse. Moab could have stretched out its hand, but it chose to close itself off. And that choice, made in a time of need, carried consequences for centuries. But the Moabites didn't stop there. Balak, the king of Moab, looked down from the hills and saw the people of Israel scattering across the valley like ants at a picnic. There were too many people, camps multiplying, smoke from bonfires rising into the sky, voices singing songs that weren't his. Fear stuck to his chest like wet cloth. He knew that Israel was no ordinary people. They said that their God opened seas, tore down walls, and sent bread from heaven. What if these people decided to advance? But Balak didn't want war, not yet. He wanted shortcuts. He wanted something more subtle. So he sent messengers to a prophet far away, a man called Balaam, famous for his sharp words and connections with the spirit world. If anyone could curse those people, it was him. The entourage arrived with gifts, promises of wealth and authority, everything a man could want. But Balaam hesitated. He heard the voice of God, and that voice said one thing clearly: "Do not curse this people, for they are blessed." Balaam sent the messengers back empty-handed, but Balak insisted. He sent others with more status, more gold, more flattery, and Balaam, vacillating between greed and reverence, agreed to go. On the journey, something strange happened. Balaam's donkey stalled 3 times, and on the last occasion it spoke to him. Yes, the donkey spoke, and the voice that came out of the animal's mouth was more lucid than the prophet's own thoughts. That was no coincidence. It was a warning. Balaam understood, even begrudgingly, that he could not fight against what God had already decided. Arriving in Moab, he went up to the high mountains, made sacrifices, looked at the people of Israel camped below. And when it came time to open his mouth, instead of cursing, he blessed. Not once, but 3 times. Balak was frothing with rage. The plan had backfired, but he hadn't given up yet. Balak had tried everything. Prophets, gold, sacrifices, nothing worked. The blessing on Israel was stronger than any curse he could afford. But then someone, perhaps Balaam himself, perhaps one of the king's advisors, made a whispered suggestion, almost like poison dripping little by little. If we can't defeat them from the outside, why don't we attack them from the inside? And so began the sneakiest plan in history. Moabite girls, beautiful as dusk after the rain, began to appear near Israel's camp. Sweet smiles, strong perfumes, eyes that said more than words. They didn't come with spears, they came with laughter. They invited the men to parties, dinners, rituals, a touch here, a dance there. Little by little, God's people let their guard down. At first, it seemed harmless, but what began as a flirtation soon turned into idolatry. The Israelites began to worship the Moabite gods, especially Baal of Peor. It was a strange cult, full of sensuality, full of images, full of everything that the God of Israel abhorred. Before long, the camp that had once echoed prayers became a scene of confusion and sin. God's wrath fell like thunder in the desert. A plague began to spread among the people, taking the lives of thousands. The camp turned into chaos, until a man from Israel called Phinehas saw with his own eyes a couple, an Israelite and a foreign woman, defying everything by entering a tent together in broad daylight. Phinehas didn't think twice. He took a spear and pierced them in the act. The plague stopped, but the damage was done. 24,000 dead. And the name of Moab was once again engraved as a stumbling block. But time is a master at turning pages. Time passed, as it always does, dragging pains, erasing footprints but leaving scars. In Bethlehem, a severe famine struck the land. The harvest failed, the grain disappeared, and what was once a bountiful table turned into silence in the pot. Among those who felt the pinch the most was a man called Elimelech, his wife Naomi, and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion. With his stomach rumbling and his future shortening, Elimelech made a difficult decision: to leave home, cross the border, and try to start over, right in Moab. Moab, the land marked by mistrust, idolatry, and a complicated past with Israel, now became a refuge. Irony or purpose? Who knows? What matters is that they arrived there and gradually adapted. Their children grew up, and as expected, they married Moabite women. One was called Orpah, the other Ruth. Life finally seemed to find some rhythm, but Moab also knew loss, and they came one after the other, like a tide pulling everything down. First, Elimelech died, then Mahlon, then Chilion. Naomi was left alone, with her 2 daughters-in-law, 3 widows in a foreign land, surrounded by memories, longing, and an empty future. No husband, no children, no bread. Then Naomi heard a rumor from afar. God had remembered Bethlehem. The land was bearing fruit again. The people were harvesting again. Naomi's heart beat differently. It was time to go back, she told her daughters-in-law. Orpah cried, hesitated, but decided to stay. Ruth didn't. Ruth squeezed her eyes shut, planted her feet, and said one of the most beautiful and striking words ever spoken. "Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God." And so it was that a Moabite woman began to walk side by side with an Israelite woman. 2 women with no guarantees, but with a firm decision, heading down towards Bethlehem, without imagining what awaited them in the fields of that city. Ruth set foot in Bethlehem with tired feet, but a firm heart. Stranger, widow, poor, all this weighed heavily on her shoulders. But what didn't weigh on her was the choice she had made. She followed Naomi like someone following a promise, even though she didn't understand the end of the story. It was harvest time, and the crops swayed in the wind, as if whispering that something new was coming. Not having much to do other than survive, Ruth went out to pick ears of corn left behind in the fields. It was the right of the poor, orphans and foreigners. She walked along without knowing which field belonged to whom. She just wanted to work, fill a bag, and have something to eat. But chance, or something greater than chance, led Ruth straight to the field of a man called Boaz. Boaz wasn't just anyone. He was related to Elimelech, Naomi's late husband. A fair, respected man who treated even his servants with dignity. And when he saw Ruth among the ears of corn, sweaty, bent over, tireless, he wanted to know who she was. "She's the Moabitess who came back with Naomi," they said. Boaz approached her, spoke to her, and praised her loyalty. He told her to leave more ears of corn for him to pick, offered her water, protection, and food. Ruth hadn't expected so much. She thanked him, surprised, her eyes full. When Naomi heard all this, she saw a chance. She began to remember the ancient laws, the right of the rescuer, the one who could marry the widow to keep the family line alive. She guided Ruth carefully, step by step. It was a delicate move. On one particular day, at midnight, Ruth approached Boaz at the threshing place and lay down at his feet in silence. He woke up startled, but he understood. Ruth wasn't asking for a favor. She was asking for redemption. And Boaz, a man of honor, didn't run away from the call. But there was one detail. There was another, closer relative who had priority in the rescue. Boaz would have to resolve this first, in front of the city's witnesses. The next morning, Boaz went to the city gate. This was where serious matters were settled, where the elders sat as judges and decisions became law. He called the other relative, the one who had the right before him, and calmly explained the case. Elimelech's land needed to be redeemed. The man perked up. Land was always a good deal. But then Boaz added, along with the land came Ruth the Moabitess, widow of Mahlon, and with her the obligation to beget offspring for the deceased. The mood changed. The man backed down. He said he couldn't, that it would disturb his inheritance. He handed over his sandal, a symbol of giving up in those days, and led the way. Boaz then, in front of everyone, declared that he would redeem the land, and also Ruth as his wife. The wedding was simple, but full of meaning. Ruth, who had left everything behind, now found a new beginning, and from that new beginning, Obed was born. A boy who ran between Naomi's legs, giving her back the sparkle in her eyes and the hope in her chest. The woman who had once said, "Call me bitter," was now cradling a grandson in her arms. Obed grew up, and when he became a man, he had a son called Jesse. And Jesse also had children, lots of them. Among them was a little red-headed boy with lively eyes, who tended sheep and played the harp in the fields. His name was David. Yes, David the king, the one who faced a giant with a stone and giant faith, the one who united tribes, wrote psalms and marked the history of Israel. And in his blood also flowed the blood of Ruth, the Moabitess, a foreigner, a widow, a woman who defied fate. But even with this powerful link, the tension between Israel and Moab did not disappear. The wounds of the past remained open. Time, which had already seen Moab welcome and hurt, now watched this people become a stone in Israel's shoe. Even with the blood of Ruth running through the veins of the royal lineage, the Moabites and the Israelites remained like neighbors with a cracked wall, always looking the other way, always waiting for the next conflict. At the time of the judges, Moab got what it wanted. It dominated Israel for 18 years. It was a dark time when God's people lived like people with chains on their feet. The Moabite king Eglon ruled with a heavy hand and a full belly. It is said that he was such an obese man that even his death was unusual. An Israelite named Ehud, left-handed and brave, entered the palace with a sword hidden in his right leg, where no one expected it. And in a quick, silent moment, he drove the blade into the king's belly so that the fat swallowed the weapon. The body remained there, fallen, while Ehud fled down the service stairs. It was the beginning of liberation, but the truce never lasted long. The Moabites allied themselves with Israel's enemies, betrayed agreements, and set up ambushes. In times of peace, they kept their distance. In times of weakness, they attacked. It was a never-ending cycle, like a fight between brothers who have forgotten the original reason, but continue to hurt each other anyway. During David's reign, the Moabites got their comeuppance. The king, now grown up and strategic, defeated Moab and put some of the people under tribute. But even that didn't end the problem. The conflicts continued generation after generation, changing only the faces, not the resentments. And while the kings took turns and the battles came and went, the prophets began to raise their voices. Men with eyes full of visions and words as sharp as knives, they spoke of things that had not yet happened, but were about to explode. The prophets appeared like thunder in a clear sky. Their words tore through the silence of the cities, echoing through the corridors of time. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, all of them, at some point, spoke about Moab. But not with affection, nor with nostalgia. They saw what ordinary people didn't see. They saw the future, and what they saw wasn't pretty. Moab, they said, would be humiliated. Its fortresses would fall, its cities would become rubble, its warriors would flee with their faces covered in shame. The pride that had been a shield for so long would become a trap. Isaiah spoke of lament and dust. Jeremiah saw weeping on the mountains. Ezekiel saw judgment coming like a torrent. The Moabites, who laughed at Israel when it stumbled, would be charged for every gesture, every word, every betrayal, and over time, that's exactly what happened. The surrounding kingdoms grew, the empires changed their names, and Moab was swallowed up. First, it lost territory, then strength, then identity, until it became a memory. The people who began with a boy born in a cave, grew as a nation and faced kings, now disappeared without a clear trace. Only ruins scattered in the desert, names lost in stone and dust. Those who passed through the ancient lands of Moab saw the emptiness and remembered the prophecies. They remembered that neither power nor history nor illustrious family are a guarantee of permanence. Everything can collapse when pride speaks louder than obedience. When rejection becomes culture, When you forget that even blessings can be lost over time. In the midst of so many falls, battles, and wrong decisions, it's easy to look at Moab and think that that's all it was, a people marked by stumbling blocks. But the truth is that behind all this history, there is something deeper. Moab wasn't just judgment, it was also a mirror, a reflection of human choices, of the fine line between right and wrong, between promise and pride, and above all, of God's ability to bring beauty out of messy scenarios. Think of Ruth, a Moabite from a rejected people who chose to love, serve, and align herself with that which was greater than herself. No one expected that from the womb of a foreign woman would be born the lineage of David, Israel's greatest king. And even less did they expect that from that same lineage would come the Messiah himself, Jesus, son of David, grandson of Ruth. What a powerful thing! Even in a people with a history of rejection, idolatry, and war, God still separated a story of redemption. He took a thread from the Moabite yarn and wove it into the eternal plan. Not by chance, not by luck, but because that's how he does it. He looks where no one looks, uses whom no one expects, transforms what seemed lost. The story of Moab shows that origin does not define destiny, but choices do. That the past may weigh on us, but it is never current if we change course. That even when history is coming to an end, God can still pull a thread and write a new beginning. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson. You may come from a complicated place, with a history full of scars, but that doesn't stop you from being part of something eternal. Moab fell, yes, but a Moabite woman rose up, and with her, a hope that has crossed generations until it reaches us today. If you liked Moab's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.